بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. I would like to welcome you all to tonight's event. Tonight's event is our first lecture for this academic year. It's on a topic that is of a great interest to you all: education, goals and ethics. If you don't hear very well or if you need a translation, please use your headsets. I know you're all very keen to listen to Professor Ramadan's speech, but before that, I would like to introduce Mr. Shawqi Al-Azhar, who is the new Deputy Director of the Center of Islamic Legislation and Ethics. Shawqi Al-Azhar is going to highlight the philosophy of the center. He would speak about the mission of the Center of Islamic Legislation and Ethics. What does it stand for? What is particular about its methodology? So we will listen to Shawqi first for a few minutes, and then we would listen to Dr. Tariq.
As you may know, the Center of Islamic Legislation and Ethics was created in 2012 in order to contribute to the renewal of the Islamic thought. In order to contribute to the renewal of the Islamic thought, one of the major findings on which the Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics has built his vision and his mission is the fact that since a few centuries, the Islamic intellectual production and the Islamic renewal in general was reduced to the fact that it is assisting the reality, an assessment that is studying the reality in the best cases to know if this reality goes against the Islamic principle or not, to know if it's halal or it's haram. Yet, it's not enough to assess the reality, to know that what's going on in the reality goes against our principles, to be faithful to the Islamic ethics. Because the Islamic message is not only about halal and haram. It's not only about rejecting or accepting. When you look at the revelation, when the revelation came, the attitude of the revelation toward the pre-Islamic society was not only an attitude of rejecting and accepting. Indeed, what the revelation accepted was what was acceptable and in the pre-Islamic society, and rejected what went against the principles and the objectives of Islam, but also it corrected what was correctable, and it improved what needed to be improved, and also it came with new means that were not available in the pre-Islamic society in order to be faithful to the Islamic ethics, in order to fulfill the objectives of Islam. So this was the attitude of the revelation towards the pre-Islamic society, and it was also the attitude of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ and the big scholars, the great scholars that came after them towards their societies and towards the reality which they lived in. So to be able to correct and improve the reality or propose new solutions or means coming from the Islamic frame of reference, we don't need only to have a good knowledge of the Islamic principles and the Islamic texts, but we need also to have a deep knowledge of the reality of the reality that we want to build or that we want to improve. This is why the Center of Islamic Legislation and Ethics aims to bring together scholars of the text and scholars of the context. The aim is not only that the scholars of the context would describe to the scholars of the text what the reality is about and how the reality is, in order to enable them to say if this reality goes against the Islamic principle or not, but the purpose also is to build together a frame of a reference frame or Islamic frame of reference that enable them to propose a new Islamic thought in the different areas of human action. like economics and education and psychology and politics and all the other areas that the center is working on. This is a way to fulfill the divine order to bearing witness to mankind. لتكونوا شهداء على الناس. This is part what the center aspires for. والله أعلم وأحكم وأقول قولي هذا والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Within this vision of combining both scholars of the text and scholars of the context in one place to tackle critical issues of contemporary world, I would like to announce that our center, CILE, Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics, is organizing a series of public lectures this year which will tackle different topics in their relationship with applied ethics. We will have lectures about ethics and media, ethics and politics, bioethics, ethics and environment, ethics and economics, the philosophy of ethics in Islam, and all our lectures would be in both Arabic and English, and we will have also some lectures which are dedicated to the French community in Qatar in the French language. So please save the date. Our next lecture would be about media and ethics, and it would be on the 3rd of November, inshallah. Now I know you're keen to listen to Dr. Tariq. So Dr. Tariq, as you all know, is the Executive Director of the Center of Islamic Legislation and Ethics. He's also a visiting scholar here in QFIS, and he is Professor of Contemporary Islamic Studies at Oxford University. So the floor is open to Dr. Tariq.
I want to welcome you all this evening for the first lecture. Let me start with this discussion about education, and as you saw, we put education and also training, teaching, because we have a problem which is the starting point. When we start with education, the problem is a problem of definition and understanding. So as an introduction, I want to raise 3 main points and then come to the substance of the lecture. The problem that we have with the understanding, the definition of education. And what I want to do with you today is not to come to something which is a simple discussion about what are the priorities and some of the objectives of education. I think that what we need, coming from an ethical background, but also questioning what is done in the field of education and training and anything which has to do with how do we transmit knowledge, is to ask some essential questions about why and how do we want to transmit the knowledge, and what is, from an Islamic perspective, the useful knowledge, al-ilm al-nafi' that we are talking about. So my main problem here, and that this is why I want to start, is the introduction, is about the concept that we are using. In fact, in Arabic, we find 2 words, and in other languages we have exactly the same, which is a bit difficult when it comes to English. التربية والتعليم. Education, and in English we say training. It's, in fact, التعليم is transmitting knowledge. Education is not only transmitting knowledge, is knowledge and behavior. Is what we are talking about. Education is how do we get the knowledge, but also how do we educate in a way where we are talking about transforming the behavior, reforming the behavior, getting the right way of behaving within a society. And this is التعليم والتربية from an Islamic perspective is something which is even more complex than this. We have it in French. We also have éducation and instruction, which is transmitting knowledge, and also the way we are dealing with educating. Very often what we have as something which is a fragmentation of roles, we say education is for the parents and instruction or ta'lim is for the educators, is for school and the teachers. This is where I think that from the very beginning we have to be very cautious with the terms that we are using and try to understand what we are talking about, because from where we start, my main point here is, in our understanding, the way we transmit the knowledge and the useful knowledge is not only the way you think, is the way you think and the way you behave. Is the way you behave with what you think. Is the way you have to reform your way of thinking through the way you behave. This relationship between behaving and thinking is essential in everything that we are now doing. let me come to some of the crises that we have in the contemporary educational systems around the world. If you listen to some anthropologues and some people who are dealing with educationists, who are dealing with the field, we have a very big problem now. And the problem is this fragmentation of knowledge. In fact, you can be very, very deep in every field. The problem, what is missing now, is the comprehensive understanding of all the knowledges together. So when it comes to, for example, medical sciences, sometimes you can be very, very sharp and very deep in understanding the way organs are working, but we lose the understanding of what is a person. We have exactly the same in economy, we have exactly the same in this fragmentation of knowledge. And there is someone, Edgar Morin, a French anthropologue, who was saying one of the big crises of the Western education or the Western system is this fragmentation of knowledge. Is rationality pushed to the end while the comprehensive understanding of what a rational way to deal with knowledge is lost. So you can be deep with a part and lost with the whole. So this is where we have to be very cautious. If we have to say something, if we have to add something, if we want to be a contribution from where we are, from our specific universe of reference as Muslims, it's important not to lose the comprehensive way, to come to be as efficient as we can when it comes to part and to some areas, but never to lose the comprehensive understanding of the whole knowledge. How do we integrate this? And this is where ethics is so important, because ethics is always not only what you know, but why do you know what you know? What do you want to achieve? What are the ends of knowledge, and what do you want to achieve in this? And this is where, for us, there is the first main understanding. And when it comes to this, in our discussion, and very often I see this, when it comes to interface dialogue, when it comes to us being involved in discussion with other specialists, in education, for example, it could be in sociology, it could be in human sciences, it could be in exact sciences, very often we go straight to the field and we start our discussion about our mutual understanding of what education could be. But there is one thing which is missing. And exactly the same, in fact, when it comes to interface dialogue. The first question that you have to ask is not about what you transmit, which knowledge you transmit, but what is your concept of human being. In fact, education is about educating a human being. And first, what you need to get is, what is your definition? What do you expect? How do you understand a human being? Because at the end, what you want, education is about what? I go along with you, at one point, I let you go your own way. So this is to educate someone, is to make him or her autonomous. But to make you autonomous means I have an idea of who you have to be. What is the being? And in our discussion, and this is not a philosophical discussion, this is the deepest spiritual discussion that should be started with. And this is why Muslims sometimes, they deal with the means and forget the first understanding if what is education and what we have to deal with when it comes to human being. Who are you and what are you trying to know and what do you want to do with what you know? From an Islamic perspective, this is where we have to start, and this is the main point that I wanted to start with as a prerequisite to our discussion. I think that in our discussion from within the Islamic tradition, but also in our dialogue with other civilizations, with people who are coming from a different religious background, philosophical background, we need to start from the very beginning and us with our own self. To stop coming to something which is importing models of education without understanding the substance of what we want to transmit. Meaning by this that we have very efficient educational systems in the West when it comes to the know-how and when it comes to mastering a specific object and area. Does it mean that coming from the West today, in the educational systems, we are targeting and we are not facing a crisis as to the real objectives of education? This is where I think we have to be very, very cautious when we import the models and not question the ends. This is what we are doing now. We want to be as efficient as the West in what? In the means, in the substance, or in the ends. questioning the ethical dimension of what we are trying to teach. And this is why I want to start, and this will be the first part of my talk today. Sorry. I'm trying to speak quite loud. Do you hear me okay? Alhamdulillah. So the first thing that I wanted to say is, from where we are, and you may think that I'm starting very far from the topic when it comes to ethics in education, but when it comes to Islam, and we are trying to get our understanding of what a human being is, we should never forget the very positive dimension Islam is putting from the very beginning in human being. وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ. He was talking about and referring to لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ. The first testimony here is that there is something in us which is الفطرة فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها. There is something in us which is a spark, which is a light, which is a very positive dimension. And this positive dimension is the very essence of everything which is going to be built when it comes to education. In education, if you want to educate, start with the positive. And from a Muslim viewpoint, what is very important is to start with the positive understanding that we have in the Quran from the very beginning. That we, from the very beginning, we have this positive, this something which is in us, which is the recognition there is transcendence. This is what we think as Muslims, but also the positive dimension of a human being, which is by definition innocent before becoming responsible. And this understanding of being innocent and then becoming responsible is going to be based on two things, which is essential in our understanding. When it comes to, and this is why, you know, if you come back to some of the usuliyin and all this literature that we have, when it comes to the fiqh and even the philosophers, be careful, be careful. In Islam, we have philosophies not only with philosophers. We have a philosophy of law with fuqaha, with usuliyun. They were all dealing with a concept of human being. How do we deal with this? And our understanding of Sharia should be based on a very deep understanding of what a human being is and how do we deal with it. And there is two things which are essential. If you come to Ibn Ashur, for example, saying, you know what, everything which has to do with ethics in Islam has to start with a very deep understanding of al-fitra. Al-fitra, which is this disposition, natural disposition that we have, which is positive in human being. And as educators, as people who are dealing with the meaning of life, the way we have to deal with other human beings, the way we have to deal with nature, the way we have to deal with other communities is all based on this positive dimension. That is, there is something that we have to revive to get this essential nature of human being. In fact, educating is reconciliation, is reconciliating the being with this very deep understanding. And it will have an impact on what? The first impact and the first understanding here that we need to understand is two things that we can even find in a commentary, a tafsir. Ibn Kathir, when he's dealing with one verse, and we will find this also in Al-Qurtubi, and then you will find this in all what was said in, for example, the work that we find with Al-Maqasidiyun, for example, Al-Shatibi. وَلَقَدْ قَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We gave dignity to human beings. It's based on what? If you deal with students now, we have young students and you have to deal with them, you want to transmit to them. You need to understand that the very beginning of everything, Muslims or people of other faiths, is based on their dignity. It's based on what? What defines the dignity of human beings? Two things. The first, which is important, is their freedom. Is their freedom. The freedom which is a risk. وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَعْلُ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءَ. Meaning, are you going to put on this earth somebody who is going to destroy, corrupt the world? Meaning what? With what? With his freedom. His freedom is a risk, but it's his dignity. This is his dignity. So freedom is essential. For us, in any educational system, if you don't deal with freedom in a positive way, you are acting against nature. You are acting against the dignity. So how you deal with your freedom is essential to avoid giving this freedom, because it's all based on what? To be a witness means you know how you deal with your freedom. It's not that your freedom is not acknowledged. It's there. And the second thing is what? وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. It's knowledge. So freedom and knowledge are the two legs that are defining the dignity of humanity, dignity of human being. And in anything which has to do with our fitra, our understanding, this is where we have to start, is to acknowledge that what we need to do is to be able, with our knowledge, to have a good understanding of the way we have to deal with our freedom. It's with your knowledge, it's iqra, it's your knowledge that is going to help you to get the best of your freedom. Why? Because without knowledge, it could be corruption. Give you an example in Surah Al-Hujurat. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying something which is, we made you nation and tribe لِتَعَارَفُوا, for mutual knowledge. What does it mean? شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِل is this diversity. This diversity is going to be managed through what? لِتَعَارَفُوا. It's a question of knowledge. With no knowledge, with ignorance, is wars. And it's going to be adversity. It's going to be mutual rejection. The only way to deal with diversity is through knowledge. So knowledge is the way you deal with your freedom to avoid the risks of freedom and the risk of conflicts. So it's all based on the way you deal. And this is why Islam is all based about this. So when it comes to our understanding, the positive understanding of al-fitra from an Islamic viewpoint, and the very deep understanding of what are the two main qualifications that human beings have to be able to come from being the first fitra, which is the first testimony, shahada ula, to the second one, which is before human being, because we acknowledge the very presence of God, is all based on this understanding of this concept of human being. Muslims, unfortunately, when they come to, when we come to trying to reconnect, what we are trying to do in this center, reconnect التشريع والأخلاق, and even everything which has to do with al-ihsan, which is the way you purify yourself. It's based on something which is a deep understanding at the end of the day of the way we deal with our freedom and the way we need to understand our connection to Allah for the deep understanding, as to the deep understanding of...
Can you raise your voice, please?
Sorry?
Can you raise your voice?
Louder?
Yes.
Louder. Okay. Khair. So this is something which is essentially on our understanding. The third thing that I wanted to add to this is what we get from the Prophet ﷺ. And as he is the model, and this is something, a third dimension here. The positive take that we have on human nature as Muslims. We start with innocence and we go for responsibility. In between, we follow models. And this is something which in education is essential. Always get this as something which is essential. The teacher should remain a model. What does it mean, a model? When are you a model? Only in the way you think? No, in the way you deal with what you think. In the way you act with what you think. A model is always a model to a behavior. Even when you think and the way you think, it's a way to behave. And this is something which is essential in Islam. Which based education is in what you see from me who is teaching you, there is one of the ends of what you are learning. It's an end, a goal in the way you are going to reform your attitude and your behavior. So as teachers, it's not only for the ulama to have a good behavior, for all teachers. There is something which is connecting ethics in what you teach, in ethics in the way you teach, and ethics in the way something is taught and something is received. So for us, all this is connected to our deep understanding of what a human being is and in which way we have to deal with knowledge. Now, the last point that I wanted to make on this, and this is why we have the Prophet ﷺ is a model and we are following his model, and the Quran is reminding us, إِنَّكَ عَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. So he's the model with al-akhlaq as what is the specificity of this? What does mean this verse? This verse means that the way he is preaching principles is the way he lives with these principles. That he is a model in the way he is acting and behaving. And for us, he's helping us, and we understand this, that from our innocence as people who are taught when we are young, to being responsible, we follow the model, and we follow the model through the principles of education and through the behavior of the teachers or the people who are teaching. And in all our understanding of education, this has to be a principle. First, something which has to do with our freedom. Freedom, it's essential. Knowledge is central to anything which has to do with this. And then the way it is taught through the model and the qualification of the one who is teaching a woman or a man. Having said that, now let me come to something which is our understanding of Allahumma nas'aluka ilman nafi'a. Ilman nafi'a, al-ilm here is the knowledge, which is not the one that we are connecting to al-tarbiyya. Al-ilm al-nafi' becomes something which is connected to al-tarbiyya, is the way I'm going to behave in two ways as Muslims. And this is why we have always to act and to remind ourselves that we are talking here about useful for this life and useful beyond this life, which is something which is our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is also something that we have to get as essential. When you say not only essential for this life, it means there is no useful knowledge that is possible to get if you go towards fragmentation of knowledge. If your knowledge is completely fragmented and you can become a specialist in this field without ethics, this cannot be a useful knowledge. Knowledge without ethics is not useful knowledge. It could be efficient, but it's not useful in the way we deal with our aqidah, in the way we deal with human beings, in the way we deal with our own self, with the way we are talking about when it comes to freedom and when it comes to responsibility. And you can see here through this discussion that everything is connected. But we can't go in a discussion about education if we are not starting with a deep understanding of what we are talking about, as which kind of human being are we talking about, and what is our concept of human beings here. This is something which is very much missing in our understanding as Muslims, and very, not only as Muslims, I would say in Africa, in southern countries, very often we are duplicating the models and not questioning the substance. And this is where I think we are facing a problem. Now, let me come to the second part of my talk and questioning. Now, we have education, and what we have coming from all the tradition in Islamic thinking, when it comes to the objectives, as you know, very often we rely on the 5 main objectives or 6 main objectives. Al-Din, which is religion, Al-Aql, the intellect, or Al-Nafs, which is the personal integrity, or Al-Nas, which is the progeny, which is Al-Amwal, the goods, and Al-Qarafi and others are added, Al-Ird, which is the other word for Al-Qarama, which is dignity. But I think that when it comes to education, we have to be much more specific. All this is good and is right, we have the main principles, but when it comes to, okay, now we are dealing with, within our societies, with very complex knowledges, very complex areas, and we need to understand what are we teaching and what do we want to achieve in all these fields. So we have to be much more specific and to understand now, with our understanding of human being, what is and what should be one of the main objectives that we want to achieve. When we say, for example, in the Islamic tradition, at one age, when it comes to the age of reason, we are mukallaf. Mukallaf means that you are able to listen to what is said in the Quran, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu. The call from God telling you, now you can understand and you have to implement what is expected from you. You are Muslims before the age of reasons, you become responsible with the age of reasons. So a taklif is what? A taklif in our tradition is not, as many people are saying in Islam, it's all about community. It's a personal responsibility. So from your innocence, you become responsible. Anything which has to do with education should put as an objective, in which way am I able to make you an autonomous human being? An autonomous human being, as it was said by one of the philosophers, not to teach you what I think, but to help you to think without me. So the point is exactly what the Prophet ﷺ was doing with his companions. Why are we coming back to some of the companions? And they have a very strong personality. The best leader is not the one who have people who think like him, but he gives them, or she gives them, the autonomy to think on their own. Autonomy of thinking, it's important. So in every of our school system, and this is not a Western way to deal with education. What is missing in many, many Arab countries, even here in this country, not at the university level, in our schools is a space where you are free to think, because we are dealing with your autonomy. And your autonomy is freedom should be one condition. And not only freedom, asking questions is a condition. And contesting is a condition. How am I going to think if I am not able to say no? To say yes is not to think, it's just to repeat. That's the point. The point, one of the main objectives here, if we come back to our tradition, and this is why I'm started with the concept of human being in Islam, anything which has to do with this, and this is why, from the very beginning, all the companions and the people, and what the companions was saying, and what we understood from the ulama, if you ask a question about one Islamic issue, you not only have the right to get the answer, you have the right to get the way the answer came. How do you think? Tell me, how do you think? I want to understand the logic of your thinking. So how is it that in many Arab countries, in many Muslim majority countries, among the Muslims, now even in the West, you know what is happening? What is vicious in the whole process? Is that we have some Muslims living in the West and they want to take from the East the traditional way. And you say what it is? When the Sheikh speaks, keep quiet. If you don't say shut up, just take what he says. And the point here is a very distorted understanding of education, which is not based on the very deep understanding that there is no Islamic education, no education from the Islamic viewpoint, no ethics in education if we don't start with autonomous person. Meaning, at one point of my life, I should be able to take my decision alone. At least for the basic things. Not for, if I have very critical discussion on things that have to do with, legal issue from Islam, of course, I'm going to see the faqih, or I'm going to see the medical doctor. But when it comes to my life, give me the means to be autonomous. Protect my freedom, and give me the critical thinking that is helping me to ask the questions and to try to find my way. So even if I don't have the answer, autonomous thinking means I should know the means, I should know where I have to go to get the answer that I'm looking for, which is part of the essential objective of Islam. Now, the second thing which is important, which is missing now, it's with this freedom, and when you get this critical thinking, you have to assume the consequence of that, which is responsibility. You take responsibility. And our world today, and what is happening now, I don't know if you heard about this study in the United States of America talking about what is happening with internet, the internet culture. Internet culture is very dangerous, not because as a means, but as the impact of the means, which is now spreading a sense of no responsibility. I can hide myself behind a name which is not mine. Anonymously, I can say whatever I want on the internet. I have a big network, I don't know who is responsible. So now we are in a world, we are all victims. If you look at what is happening in Muslim majority countries, we are victims. They don't like us. They are imposing onto us. You go to the West, we are under threat. The Muslims are coming, or the immigrants are coming. A world where, even when it comes with thoughts, we are not dealing with responsibility. The victim mentality is the opposite of anything which has to do with the Islamic understanding of education. Education is be autonomous and responsible. And you take your decision based on your own responsibility. And you have to be educated to get the instruments of your own autonomy. So as teachers and as parents, when it comes to tarbiyah and when it comes to ta'aleem, what we have to give to our students is the means to be autonomous and the conscience to be responsible. This consciousness that you are responsible is something which is important. So this is where we have to start. And this is where, when the means are more important than our understanding of how it works, we end up being on a situation where we are on the defensive, victims of the means of the perceived others. And don't tell me that it's only coming from the West. This is a general disease that we find in all Muslim societies or Muslim majority countries and Muslim communities. This is something that we are sharing, and it's an international disease. And this is one of the objectives here of education, is how do we do that? How do you get this sense of responsibility when we started with a positive understanding of the innocence at the beginning, and then you become responsible and autonomous in the way you deal with your own knowledge. So this is another dimension of our responsibility when it comes to our understanding of the world. We also have something which is essential. You know, if you come back to al-Usuliyun, when al-Shafi'i, and before him, which is Ja'far ibn Sadiq, when he was the first to start this framework, how do we deal with the text and we extract from the text? And in al-Shafi'i, he was just trying to summarize what are the fundamentals. Now we may be critical or not with even the area of usul, because there are lots of discussion. I don't want to go into this discussion. My discussion here is, what did they understand from the very beginning? There is no way you are going to be trustworthy, or you are not going to betray the very meaning of the text. You're not going to be faithful to the text if you don't understand the environment, if you don't understand the world. So there is no education for us which is only based for alim, know the text and forget the world. Our education, siru fil ard wanzuru, this is something which is essential. When it is said to you, the world is a mosque where you can prostrate, it means this is a place that you have to respect and that you have to study. Our understanding of the world, of nature, of all these sciences, this is not, please, this is a problem that we have. We took this from the West in the Middle Ages, when we decided these are sacred knowledges and these are profane knowledges. Why is it so? Tell me why, when I study the human body, this is not sacred. Why, when I study biology, it's not sacred. And why it's only the text? Is it only the text? But the world has been created by whom? By Allah. So it's sacred. When you know about this, you are dealing with a sunan al-kawniyya. You need to know them. You need to know the culture. You need to know how the people. So this differentiation is giving what? In fact, implicitly putting some authority to one side of the spectrum and dismissing the other. And we give this impression you have the right knowledge if you know the text, and not so good knowledge. The only one with which we understand that it's a question of life and death is medical science, because we cannot play with this. But all the other sciences, there is something which is a problem. The comprehensive approach of Islam when it comes to education and knowledge is all based, respect all the knowledges. You can't understand the Quran if you don't understand the world. You are not going to find your way in the world if you don't have the light of the Quran. This is what we think. This is what we think in ethical terms. But we need to be very, very clear on the fact that all these knowledges, and I will come to this, because even with profane, what we call profane sciences, we have a hierarchy. And we Muslims are accepting this, that there is a hierarchy that we are accepting very quickly without questioning this. When it comes, for example, to something which is, tell me something, is it not that the Prophet ﷺ, when he arrived in Medina, he was very cautious with the well-being of the people? Okay, the well-being of the people in Ansar, because they liked, for example, music, he was very cautious. Be careful, they like this. How is it that today we think that the only right way to deal with the context has to do with tell me what is haram and tell me what is halal? Well, I'm sorry. When I come to a place, I want, as a Muslim, to find where in this place I can have the well-being. The well-being means I feel good. And don't tell me only when it's halal, because lots of things are halal. So we are doing this the opposite. Remove the haram to know where you are good. You can feel good. That's the opposite. So in education, this attitude, which being creative with the halal to help me, and the permissible, al-mubah, to help me to feel good, this is an intellectual revolution that the Muslims need. It's to look at the world and say, with this, al-mubah, which is the majority of things, let me find in al-mubah something which is helping me to feel good. I want to feel good. You don't like it? I like it. It's Islamic. Don't tell me you are doubting my faith, because I am doubting your judgment. That's the point where in our discussion here, we need also to think about all these knowledges that are helping the people to feel good. And when the people are losing this responsibility, you know what we are witnessing today? I was talking about being responsible. What is the opposite of being responsible? Is to feel victims. What is the other side, in spiritual terms, of feeling victims? It's superstition. And our societies, I'm just coming back, and it's not only in Africa, here. Something is not right. Tell me about the jinn. There are jinns. Yes, there are. But please, don't go from the jinns to something which is a complete superstitious way of dealing with reality. You go to Egypt, you go to Morocco, you go now in the United States of America and Europe, and say we have people asking, I need a ruqyah. Say, why? There is something wrong in my life. What? Something wrong with my husband, with my wife. We end up not looking at the problems, but we are victims of something which is bigger than us. This lack of it could be that we have this, but we have to go through this responsibility. Superstition is the opposite of spirituality. Spirituality is to know what is under my responsibility and what is not. It's not to start with, I'm not responsible. There should be something that has been done to me. And I think that this is where we need also to come with a deep understanding. And it's not something which is marginal. I'm sorry. When you deal with Muslims today, you see it's not marginal. It's not marginal. When you have someone who is a university professor who is coming to me and say, it should be this. Have you tried something? Have you talked to a psychologist? A psychologist? It's as if psychology is not Islamic. Louder. Okay. How much time I have? 5 minutes? 5 yes? Okay. So, this is where I think when it comes to our understanding of this, what a human being is, freedom and responsibility, this is something which is also in our understanding when it comes to nature and all the sciences. There is something else that we also need as, I have 3. I'm trying my best. There is something else which is also important in the way we deal with education and transmitting knowledge, is what I said first when it comes to our relationship to others. And I'm sorry, once again here, I learn much more about religious pluralism and other religions among people of other faiths than among Muslims. We keep on, when we are in interfaith dialogue, we like this verse, and we are right. It's a very, very important verse. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying in Surah Al-Hujurat that we made you tribes and nations in order for you to know each other. We like it for them. No, about us. Open your mind. We are good, nice people. But what about the Muslims? What about the Muslims where, in fact, part of our understanding, if we are ready, if we are serious about respecting Allah's will, we need to know about other traditions. At least to understand why we are and who we are in the whole diversity, and then what are the differences and in which way we deal with others. It's not about converting the people, because some are entering interfaith dialogue to know how many are going to be converted at the end. That's not a dialogue. This is proselytism. It's none of your business. But what is your responsibility before God and in your conscience is to know, because He is telling you, لِتَعَارَفُوا. Know about the others, learn. So our education is something which should be based on curiosity. Be open. Have this sense of curiosity towards the other. It's not only, and we can see that there is a problem even in our education. Muslims are very much here and heard when it comes to discussing Islam. And sometimes they don't even talk in the right way about their own religion. So we have here to get this sense, which is one of the objectives of education, is curiosity, is to be open, is to learn from people, because there are many if you trust rationality. Do you trust rationality as Muslims? Of course we trust rationality. Al-Fitra is telling us rationality is going to produce good things naturally. So people who are not Muslims are going to produce things that are completely in agreement with yourself. It's not coming from a Muslim mind, but it's very much Islamic. While many things are coming from Muslim minds that are not Islamic. So this is where our education should be open. So we need sometimes not to take the methodology from the West, but sometimes much more some of the substance of what we are teaching in this understanding of diversity and pluralism, which is part of our understanding, opening the mind of our students to other. And why don't we do that? Because very often we are scared. With a lack of confidence, we think, I'm not going to give you this knowledge in order, with this knowledge, to protect you from going astray, which is today exactly the opposite which is happening. Out of ignorance, you are more in danger than out of knowledge. So if you are not protected by your knowledge, you're not going to be protected by your inner ignorance of others and other traditions. So this is where, once again, we have to think about that. Yes, or maybe 5. Sorry. So now, 3 things that I wanted to add so this is something which is the knowledge of the other, which I think it's missing in our, and very often missing in the way we structure our way of transmitting knowledge and behaving with others. And not only in Muslim majority countries or not only in the West, everywhere. This is an international challenge that we have to face everywhere in the way we deal with this. Now there are 3 other knowledges which are also important beyond the knowledge of the world. As I said, 3 things are important. The connection between our schools and our universities and the way we live in. You know, when all the people were very critical of what was happening in Sudan, and I was critical of the political system, but I went there and I saw something which was proposed by the Minister of Education, which were universities which were teaching things that had to do with the local community, connecting universities and cities, which was done in other places. But this was a very interesting project, which is in which way we connect our teaching with the environment, with the society. And this connection is something which has to do with the useful knowledge, is how not to have this kind of elite that we have here, closed from everything which is around us. We have to connect with the society. We have to connect. A alim is not someone who is perceived as an alim far from the community. He's serving the community. A university is a university if this university is serving the society. There should be a connection as to the knowledge, as to the substance, and as to the connection in which we are serving the people. So this understanding of education is something which has to do with the society. And there we understand that we need to give much more emphasis. One of the big crises that the Muslims worldwide are facing is our very, very, I should say, acknowledge weakness in anything which has to do with cultural production and creativity, as I said. Cultural production means from where you are, what are you proposing? And cultural production has to do with well-being. Creativity has to do with arts and creativity. I'm sorry, we think too much in halal and haram and in al-mubah, everything which has to do with creativity, you can say that music is haram, many opinions on this. You can say that painting is haram, many opinions of this. I don't think that this is the only opinion, but the point is, whatever is your take, if you deal with education and you are not serious about culture, creativity, arts and well-being, it means that you are not educating. You are protecting, you are isolating, and you are putting people in jail. No way that they are going to be protected with the outside world. They are going to be attracted in one way or in another. Because the culture, the dominant culture, is much stronger and powerful than your own protections. So you better think about an alternative than to think about isolating. Isolating, they are not going to be isolated so much and too long. So this is where we need to think about this. And this is where we need to think in a very professional way. Arts is not amateurism. It's not just paint something, it's beautiful, and a very small, and then a sheet with some, no, it's very deep. Education is to now highlight, to give some value to creativity in our school systems at all the levels. Understanding that Islam and spirituality has to do with you have to isolate yourself to purify yourself, but it doesn't mean that you have to feel bad. That's not the Islamic tradition. Islamic tradition is much more positive than this. And the last 2 points that I wanted to say here is when you have الَّذِينَ جَهَدُوا بِأَمْوَالِهِمْ وَأَنفُسِهِمْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. We know that very often we take this verse, you know, the people who are striving in the way, in the path of Allah with their goods and with their own person. They give, they sacrifice. I think that there is something that we need to connect with our education system. When we talk about autonomy, when we talk about freedom, when we talk about responsibility, when we talk about creativity, when we talk about being involved in the society when it comes to communication and the knowledge of the other, there is something which has to do with speaking your mind. And not in an emotional way. You know that the Muslims and the Arabs and the Africans and the southern countries, we are very happy when someone comes and say, speak your mind, be courageous. But we are with this in a very emotional way. We are so frustrated that when someone comes, wow, say it. Education is not about emotions. It's about mastering your emotion. And it's a system of education that you promote courage, that you promote speak your mind, that you promote a word of truth. And in our cultural and educational system, we should put it as a methodology. How do you bring me with the instrument of courage, speaking my mind? There is a lack of courage in many of the way we are dealing with education, to speak our mind and to understand the very meaning of the verses that we have in the Quran, which has to do with you give from yourself, the sense of sacrifice. Sacrifice means you have to pay a price. Are you ready? Are you ready to pay a price that sometimes you speak your mind and you will have to face the reality of the world? This has to do with the spiritual understanding. If you say La ilaha illallah means there is no power than his power. So at one point I have to face the power of my teacher if he's wrong, the power of my parents if they are wrong, the power of the society if there is wrong. It's not to idealize, to romanticize the past and not to be able to teach this today. This is something which is missing. There is in our education a lack of courage, and it means a lack of consistency. And then we are not dealing with the 3 dimensions here. So it's a liberating process that we have. So having said that, and my conclusion is, we need to deal, when it comes to education, to the concept of human being in a deep way. Once again, it's a very short lecture. I'm just starting to put some elements of something which should help us to think about what are the objectives when it comes to education and to any school system when it comes from an Islamic perspective, based on starting with the concept of human being. The second point has to do with, as I said, some of the elements. Autonomy, it's important. Self-respect and respecting, it's important, as I said. Humility, because I also wanted to add something in the way you deal with others. When, for example, I am a product. I'm coming from, my family is coming from Egypt, as you know, but I was born and raised in Switzerland. There is something that I heard with people who were challenging me as a Muslim. They help me to do something which is now rooted in me. And it helps me to deal with everything in my life, which has to do with intellectual humility. You might think that you have the truth, but intellectual humility is that the people are challenging you and you understand that they have legitimate questions. that they have right questions. And you know what? Sometimes they have better answers than you. So you have to have this intellectual humility, which is based on this sense of pluralism, this openness, which is important. Responsibility, as I said. There is one thing that I forgot that I would have to add here in anything which has to do with education is solidarity. I had it as a point, but as I don't have time, solidarity is also to connect our education with everything which has to do with how do we serve. Once again, we get knowledge not to be served, but to serve. So a sense of solidarity in everything that we, I don't know how our schools in a Muslim majority country, in Muslim communities everywhere, every school should be connected to a solidarity thing, a solidarity program. There is no other way. You teach to give some knowledge, and with this knowledge you serve the people around you. So this kind of solidarity out of knowledge, not solidarity with money, intellectual solidarity. It's also something which is important. Is the way we deal with people who know less, who have less opportunity, is also something that we have to deal with it. So it's not only about efficiency and getting money with our social systems. I think that once again we can import the know-how, we can import the models. I think that our main contribution today should be to question the substance and to question the objectives. Thank you.